Hello and welcome to the very, very first episode of Coaching Unpacked. We are delighted to have you here for what is going to be fun, digestible, energetic coaching, methods of coaching, chats about coaching. Because do you know what? We've sat down for a long time. Sarah, welcome. Adam, welcome. We've sat together for some time now, haven't we? Discussing all things cognition, your company, Cognitive Coaching, Sarah, our company, EduPulse, and we've just found that our worlds have collided when we've been talking about mental models and judgment in the moment and expertise and adaptation and everything that looks like. And we've settled upon realizing that there aren't enough models of coaching out there to unpick. And that's why we're here today, essentially, is to offer everybody listening and everybody watching opportunities to see how it's possible to unpick models of coaching. It isn't the model. There's plenty out there, but it is one of them. And if you are a coach or if you are training coaches, then happy birthday, Merry Christmas. This is CPD, from which you can pick and choose and have it to your heart's content. My name is Chris. I'm a deputy head teacher and I'm not a coach and I've never been coached. And I'm very excited to be on this journey with two wonderful, wonderful people who are going to introduce themselves now. And it's my pleasure to sit virtually opposite Sarah Cottinger. How are you? Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Chris says he's not a coach, but was just telling us the other day about how he was doing some coaching. So I'm pretty sure he is a coach, actually.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, dipping his toe in. Yeah, my name's Sarah Cottinghat. I am head of learning design at Iris Connect, and I have a company called Cognitive Coaching, and we work with schools to improve their coaching, improve their shared language and mental model around what effective learning is for students, and lots of good stuff like that. I also coach some school leaders and have the pleasure of coaching some brilliant teachers as well. Yeah. That's me, Adam.
Yeah, Adam, let's hear about you.
All right. So I'm Adam Colbeck. I'm the other half of EduPulse alongside Chris, and I'm also a deputy head teacher of a school in South East London. And happily, the majority of my job revolves around teacher development and teaching and learning, pedagogy, all of that lovely stuff that everybody kind of comes into the profession for. And I've somehow managed to get 15, 16 years in, and I'm still really connected to that in the job that I get to do day to day. So I'm clinging on to that as long as I possibly can, because I absolutely love it. So I coach 4 teachers at the moment, and I also do some leadership coaching within my school and a little bit beyond as well. But yeah, the real joy that I get out of my day to day is the coaching that I do with leaders, and the sort of broader professional development that I do as part of my role in school.
Absolutely fabulous. I think that qualifies you both to kickstart our little venture, Coaching Unpacked. So for everyone watching and everyone listening, the way this format is hopefully going to work, because we're going to be really well behaved and we're going to try and stick to it, is that Adam and Sarah are going to show us all an example of a coaching session, and Sarah can set that up in a moment. We can observe it, we can listen to it, and then we're going to unpick it. And it's an opportunity for you guys then at home listening, whether you're in your car or you're at work, or maybe even in the bath with a nice glass of wine, listening to this episode of Coaching Unpacked. It's an opportunity for you to get in touch with us on Twitter. Or X. We are Coaching Unpack. You can find us there. Send us your suggestions, your questions, your thoughts, because if there's something that we definitely 100% are, it's open to conversation, criticism, chat. We are not presenting anything or anything. We're just presenting something, and it'd be great to have you guys interact with us as well. So without further ado, to my 2 coaches, Sarah, do you want to just set us up in this specific example, and then we can get going?
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So this is not a real coaching conversation in the sense that I'm not actually coaching Adam on his teaching, but this is based on a real conversation that I had with a coachee, and we're sort of reenacting it with permission. So the situation is that my coachee wanted me to watch the discussion portion of her lesson, and she was feeling quite frustrated that she was trying to use this technique, agree, build, challenge, where students would listen to one another and say whether they agree could build or wanted to challenge what that person had said. And she felt quite frustrated. She's been trying to embed this technique, and she felt really annoyed because she just has been trying to get students to listen to one another so that they could use this technique, but it's not been happening. So if you imagine that I am coaching Adam, who has this particular problem, and I watch that portion of his lesson, and we're going to dive into that part of the conversation. Are you ready, Adam?
Ready and raring to go.
Okay. So you wanted me to come in and watch that 20-minute segment of your lesson where you were doing the discussion. And I want to start off by asking, what was your goal at that point in the lesson?
I think like my goal came from what was a product of what I'd set up before that. So I think I'd done quite a good job of kind of giving all the students a really sound understanding of all the concepts that had led up to that point in the learning sequence. And so really what I was most bothered by was getting them to be able to now think deeply about all of the concepts that I taught them, like in combination. So I suppose if I was to sum it up, it would be to think deeply, so that they were then able to agree with each other, but with purpose and with reason, build on what each other had said, again with purpose, or challenge what each other had said with justification. So yeah, I think if I was to sum it up, that would be how I would sum up what I was trying to achieve.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay. So that was the goal. And like in relation to learning, it's around like thinking deeply. What does that do for learning, Adam?
So I think like thinking deeply it's important because ultimately memory is the residue of thought. And so if I want children to be able to remember stuff over the long term, they need to have been thinking about it hard at some point as well. And preferably, I guess, like more than once, like thinking hard about it more than once. So I know that kind of deep engaged thought is important for that reason, because I want them to be able to go and kind of take that learning forward in future.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay. So you've got a strong, powerful goal there around learning. Talk me through what happened during that time.
Well, so I think I set it up pretty well. I think that like the opening question that I asked to kind of spark the discussion was good. I think there was loads in there. So they had loads to talk about and therefore loads to think about, which is why I was kind of quite surprised when I just felt that they weren't listening to each other. So there was like lots of talking going on, lots of ideas, lots of chat. But when I was going around and I was listening to their conversations, there wasn't really any attempt to build or challenge. And the agreement was kind of without reason. So yeah, my sort of conclusion from that was that they just weren't listening to each other. And I kept stopping it and reminding them of the importance to listen, and reminding them of the fact that I was going to be asking them to agree with justification, build or challenge. And it just didn't seem to work. It just didn't land. They just would not listen to each other. So yeah, that was my biggest frustration, and like definitely the problem that I saw.
Yeah. So I'm sort of like drawing out a bit of a cycle here. So you set them off on this discussion, you've gone to kind of listen in, you're not getting the quality of discussion that you're hoping for, that you thought you'd sort of set up really. And so you're stopping them, reminding them, and then that kind of cycle happened a few times, didn't it?
Yeah, like 3 or 4 in the time that you were there.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got kind of what happened. Let's now think about what the causes could be. So you've kind of talked about one particular cause around not listening. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I suppose starting from what I could actually observe and see was that like when partner A was talking to partner B, partner A just sort of had this sort of glazed look over them in a lot of cases, and it literally looked like they just were not taking it in. And I suppose when I sort of sat and thought about it afterwards, I kind of thought, well, it looks like they're not paying attention. Like their attention is not on the content of what's being spoken about with their partner. So my hunch is that attention is the biggest problem there. Like I haven't managed to get them to direct their attention to the point that I wanted it at.
Okay, so we've got this hunch that it could be that they're not listening, they're not paying attention to one another. What other causes could there be of them not being able to agree, build and challenge on what their partner said, other than listening?
I guess to try and get to another cause, I suppose that I would have to reflect back on what had come before that, and like the ingredients of that lesson up to that point, and like what were the features of that lesson up to that point. because I guess whatever I've done beforehand has then led to what's followed. I suppose quite a key feature of the lesson would have been that there was quite a lot of content in there. So there was a lot of different concepts that I'd introduced. Some of them actually I hadn't introduced. Some of them I was pulling from previous lessons. But then I suppose there's an effort involved in that, isn't there? From kind of trying to remember stuff from when you've first been taught it. Combine that with a couple of new concepts that I definitely did introduce in that lesson. So I suppose there's quite a lot for them there to be thinking about. And I guess maybe that's less of an attention issue and more a case of like them having too much to think about. I don't know. I mean, I've read and heard quite a bit in like whole staff PD about cognitive load theory. Would that be something that maybe would be sort of worth considering as a potential cause? Maybe they're cognitively overloaded.
I like that you've kind of gone upstream and thought about what happened before. So you said that there's quite a lot of content, they're recalling from previous lessons, and you've introduced some new concepts. So it sounds as if you've got another hunch there that's reasonable around perhaps they're hearing what the other person's saying, but they're struggling to take it all in order to process it, to agree, build, and challenge. And in a way, that's perhaps, given how much you reminded them to listen, the work you've been doing on listening, perhaps we could say that cause could be a sort of main reason why they weren't able to do that. So there is kind of evidence for that as well. If that was the cause, and we're holding your goal in mind as well, Adam. So your goal is that you want to get them thinking deeply about those key ideas so that they can do things like agree, build, and challenge. If the cause is cognitive overload, what might we do differently instead of the discussion that you set up?
As you were talking, like what I was trying to think of was actually like there's almost three things that I'm asking them to do, like in a broad sense there. So I'm asking them to like organise their own thoughts. So if I'm partner A, I've got to organise my own thoughts about the concepts that have come up in that particular lesson that I taught previously. I've got to hold that. Then I've got to organise the thoughts that my partner is giving me. So I'm taking their words and I'm kind of trying to organise that into some sort of formulated schema or mental model. And then what I've got to do is integrate my existing thoughts with their thoughts together to try and get like a bit of an understanding of it. So I guess there's like three layers of stuff that I'm trying to do there. So my sort of gut instinct now is to think, well, is there a way that I can break those things up? Like, is there a way that I can first of all organise my own thoughts, then kind of park that and deal with organising the thoughts of my partner, park that or sort of hold those two things somehow, and then start to integrate them.
I think that's nice. So what you've done there is you've thought specifically about what is like causing that potential overload. And you think there's an element there of like having to do all of those things. So there's a lot of kind of complexity there, but there's also a sort of element of transience there as well, isn't it? You kept saying sort of holding it in your head, and that's very much like something that can cause cognitive overload. So that gives both of those things, that idea of breaking it up and that idea of stopping it from being transient, might hint at what might be a better option for you in terms of an activity to give them or activities. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. That word has really resonated, actually, transience. That's really made me think, because ultimately that is the problem with how I'd organise that conversation, right? So there's too much for them to hold. And so therefore they've kind of got something in working memory. But then, so they've got their own thoughts organised in working memory. But then as soon as the thoughts of their partner come in, that then causes this sort of transient effect on their own thoughts, and they're sort of replaced by their partner. So they're not able to hold both at the same time. So I guess, like, hear me out on this one. Let me know what you think of this suggestion then. So I guess really what I need to do is find a way of parking or outsourcing partner A's thoughts. So perhaps if I was to sort of pose a question and I was to go, right, okay, guys, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to do your own independent thinking. No writing, no talking, just independent thinking in response to this question. Because I think that's something they just don't do, right? They don't spend actually, and I think as teachers, I don't think we give them long enough sometimes to develop their thoughts. But then as adults, when we're thinking hard about something, what we think 30 seconds into that thought is like wildly different from what we thought about in sort of seconds 2 and 3. So if I gave them like 30 seconds to think hard about something independently, and then I gave them like a further minute to then jot down those ideas. So I'd go think and then jot. That jotting maybe on a mini whiteboard, that would give them the opportunity to organise their thoughts, but on the mini whiteboard. So they don't have to hold their own thoughts in their head then. They've kind of outsourced that bit onto the mini whiteboard, which then would kind of free up some working memory space to then listen to a partner. So I'd go think, then I'd get them to jot. Then the next thing would be to listen to what the partner had said or what their partner was saying. And I guess potentially add to their own. So I could get partner A to then add to their jottings with what partner B was saying, which would then kind of store both of those things in the same place, like partner A's thoughts and partner B's thoughts. And then lastly, I could get them to do that sort of integration piece. And that, I suppose, is where the conversation would be going more backwards and forwards between A and B. What do you think?
So your goal is that thinking hard. You're wanting them to always kind of looping back to your goal. You're wanting them to think really deeply. So your strategy there to have that 30 seconds of thinking hard, that 1 minute to jot down ideas, which we know is like both the kind of stopping it being transient, but also there's thinking in that, isn't there, as well? And that helps them to organise it. So just got a couple of questions there. So first one is, why mini whiteboards and not their books? So you mentioned that they're doing it on mini whiteboards. Why is that beneficial, do you think?
Well, I suppose there's like selfishly, I suppose it's easier for me to see that, like walking around, It's easier for me to pick up what's on those mini whiteboards. I think as well, there's a more editable value to a mini whiteboard. If someone jots the thought down and then wants to change it, it's like, okay, fine, I can just rub that out quickly and change that. So again, I'm thinking of a student that maybe jots down a thought initially and then keeps thinking, because of course I'm giving them a minute to think, and then thinks actually that thought's now developed enough that I want to get rid of that and replace it with something else. So yeah, I think mini whiteboards would probably be quite useful for those two reasons. Like, firstly, for me being able to check quickly, and secondly, it's got that editable value.
Nice. So one more thing then, I think there you've kind of worked in a strategy that solves our sort of intrinsic load problem, but I'm not sure about extraneous load, because you've introduced a strategy which is not one that it sounds like they've used before, and there's multiple steps to it. So there's thinking, there's jotting, there's integrating the thoughts that they haven't done before. So I'm just wondering what you could do to minimize the extraneous load of that task. I'm thinking about you maybe modeling to them how to do it, but would that be a kind of good idea, or is there any other ways you can kind of reduce the extraneous load of how the task is set up?
So I guess I've got two thoughts there. So the first one would be like, yes, definitely, I think modeling it, and probably modeling it piece at a time. So I model the thinking, then I get them to do the thinking. I model the jotting, I get them to do the jotting. So and that's obviously when I first introduced this as a strategy. I could introduce it and model it in that way. The other thing I'm thinking of as well, though, is perhaps that bit where I'm getting them to integrate. I'm now wondering, is that actually like fully necessary, or is actually what I'm asking them to do to think, then to jot down their ideas, then to listen to their partner's ideas, then to almost have a little bit of thinking time again, like another 30 seconds thinking and going back to their jotting, and then respond with either an agree, build, or challenge. So I'm thinking that potentially that feels a little bit cleaner, whereas the idea of integration, that potentially adds an element of unpredictability to that. Integrate is less well defined than think, jot, listen, think, respond.
Nice.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's great. So you've you've assessed it from an intrinsic load perspective, like how do I break this down for them, because just listening to their partner is too much, potentially the cause, we don't know for sure, but we think potentially. So you've broke it down from that perspective. You've come up with a way of doing it, and you've tried to, the way you sort of first thought about doing it, perhaps too much extraneous load there in terms of like, what does integration look like in terms of like the task? So instead, what we'll do is we will have time to kind of listen and reflect back on what we wrote down in order to agree, build, or challenge. Have I summed that up right, Adam?
Yeah, that's super helpful the way you've just explained that. Yeah, absolutely right. That's what I meant.
And cut.
That was excellent. Yes, guys, brilliant. I love that. That was amazing, Adam. The acting skills in that then from you were top draw. Very, very impressive.
But you know what? That's very, very kind of you to say. But I tell you, and this is a big thing, I think, with the sort of wider issue of like rehearsal. When we started to do that, I was able to project myself into the machine of being that teacher, because I have literally been that teacher, like many, many times. So actually, I've just taken myself back to that point. So that was super. Even as someone who, like, you know, that it wasn't my lesson, it was a bit of a reenactment. I have genuinely taken something from that. And the next time, because we kind of talked about a little bit about where we might go with that conversation, but there was so much of that, wasn't there, Sarah, that came out that we hadn't sort of planned at all. And the next time I'm in a class and I'm running a whole class discussion, I'm going to be conscious of that without any shadow of a doubt. And yeah, no, it was great.
It only hit me as it was happening that I was listening and jotting in my little notebook, ready to now respond to everything live in the moment. You got to have your pen and your notebook. Something that really struck me in trying to unpack this with you being here, which is such a rich experience, and kind of feel very, very lucky to be able to sit and do this, like the Jonathan Ross of coaching interviews. Maybe that's a bit too low bar. Sorry, Jonathan.
Michael Parkinson.
Thank you very much. Have you read the book by my wife? No, how do we get onto this? Stop it. Right. People are driving. They want to be listening to this properly. What really struck me about this was where, Sarah, you said about you really liked Adam's upstream thinking. And in the episode that no one will ever hear, because we did one of these already and it was nothing like this, and it has gone into the podcast bin in the sky and no one will ever speak of it, but we unpacked that little the upstream metaphor. And Adam, you were saying, you know, it's quite an old adage, but the version you say is, you know, you've got a couple of teachers, they're in the stream, and they are fighting, as we do in our jobs, all day to stop the kids from drowning. We're chucking the kids out, and everyone's working really, really hard, and all of the teachers are worked to the bone, and they're soaking wet, and they're tired, but it's a really, really important job. And at some point, somebody says, "You carry on. I'm going to get out, and I'm going to walk upstream to find out why on earth these kids keep falling in." Which, when you mentioned that to me, I think it was in our very first EduPulse podcast, 11 Things I Wish I'd Known Before Becoming a Teacher. We were discussing that, and it really, really struck me, and it has stuck with me. So, Sarah, it's really interesting that you mentioned about that upstream thinking, because to me, that's all about cause and effect, right? That is all about what am I looking at now and what has happened. It doesn't mean that the work I'm doing now isn't important, because it really, really is, but there might be something more in getting out of that stream and walking up alongside a coach you trust. Let's have a walk up the riverbank and let's try and find out what's happening. Have I read too much into that, Sarah, or is that exactly what you were going for when you said that Adam had done some upstream thinking?
Yeah, exactly that. And that's a really useful way of thinking about it as well, with that kind of analogy. So better teachers, it seems, can kind of do that sort of upstream thinking. So when we're coaching, we might want to encourage that kind of upstream thinking. Adam can do it just off the top of his head. But it's that idea that if we're asking about cause and effect, which is a really important part of your mental model of how a situation works and how a situation happened, what kind of causes led to the problem that I'm seeing. Sometimes we can all get fixated on a particular cause. So Adam had a particular sense that it was about listening, and he was getting quite frustrated about the listening not happening. But that kind of wasn't really, it was like a bit of flogging a dead horse a little bit, because he kept telling them to listen and they weren't listening. And it was like, is there another reason? Is there another cause? Maybe it is the listening, but perhaps it's another cause. And I think talking about cause and effect, it taps into mental models and trying to develop a teacher's mental model. It also gives us possible solutions we might not otherwise consider, like it did in this kind of conversation. And I think the third reason it's useful is because it recognises the complexity of the environment that teachers are teaching in. There's rarely like one cause for an effect. And if we can get teachers, as they become able to see it, if we can help them sort of to grow the complexity of their thinking as well in a way that's manageable for them, I think that helps them deal with situations in future as well. So sort of three key reasons there why trying to think about the cause of the problem and perhaps multiple causes might be useful. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, do you know, I think it's such an interesting point around like the different potential causes, because no one's saying that like that any one particular cause is wrong, but sometimes that there's sometimes we have cases where a particular cause is more likely and is probably more powerful. I think that like my sense would be that it's much easier for a teacher to zoom in on potential behavioural causes. So like, what is the behaviour that I'm observing and thinking, oh, that's the cause. So the behaviour that I can observe as the teacher is they're not listening. And I can kind of connect that loosely to attention. And that's what I did in our conversation. But as the coach, because I'm not the one that's in the super complex environment, because I'm observing that environment, I'm not actually trying to manage it and make it effective. I can probably consider some more sort of less visible causes potentially. So like a cognitive cause. And I think what you hit on in our conversation was actually that you were trying to get me to consider a cognitive cause of the problem, because my initial awareness was only really for the behavioural cause. And I think that's a really important point to make, I think, when we're talking about cause and effect, is that the causes that you're going to be aware of as the teacher will be necessarily quite narrow. Because of the complexity of the environment, you can't be aware of everything. You can't be considerate of everything. You have to like choose what you're going to delete out and filter away so that you can actually get something done. Whereas as a coach, your awareness can be much wider because you're not having to deal with all of that complexity. And so, yeah, your sort of sphere of awareness around what potential causes could be will be much wider. And that's why it's so beneficial for a teacher to have a coach, because it enables their necessarily narrow awareness of what, in this case, the potential causes could be to be widened. That's the job of the coach in this case, right?
Well, I've got a potentially tricksy question for you, Sarah, and Adam. You might be able to unpack it a little bit as well. The tricksy question is from kind of a relative non-coach, because if I do coaching, it's accidental, and I get in touch with you two, and I'm like, I think I did a coach. It happened. It just slipped out. I didn't mean to. Is are you being manipulated by this person into doing the thing that they think is the best thing for the the worst kind of coaching experiences I've had. I said I haven't been coached, but I think not coached successfully, is where the coach has come in with, this is, I want to see more cold calling from this teacher, and therefore that's what they focus on, and I feel like I'm being led down a path that I didn't want to go down. What I really enjoyed, Sarah, was your open questions. Some of us who want to do coaching are led to believe that they are without motivation, motive. Sorry. So they're like, I'm just going to ask these open questions, and we're going to come to the sunny uplands together. But actually, it felt like you were moving Adam towards a different way of thinking. So have you had to work on, what was your preparation for this? What did you have to work on as the coach? What did you have to align? What was your thinking to then align it with? Does that make sense? To align it with Adam's thinking? It felt like you were bringing two things together, and not in a bad way, because it really, really worked. But it did feel at the end that you perhaps got Adam to a place that you had not foreseen, but certainly had intended on driving in that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does. I think it's a really good question about this, like, are you kind of being manipulated point as well? So when I prepare for coaching, I try to see it in this way, and Adam is kindly on this journey with me, which is, if you see yourself as having a particular viewpoint of the situation in that teacher's lesson, and you recognize that the teacher has also got a viewpoint that's different from yours, necessarily different, just as Adam said, you've got kind of like different lenses, or what we call different mental models of the situation. I can't impose my viewpoint on Adam, and nor would I want to, because Adam's the teacher, so he's got like a kind of a more useful viewpoint of how to teach these students. But I've got this kind of wider lens. I can capture more information, and I can form my own sort of sense of where things might go. So I think the first step is to basically get Adam's mental model out there of what happened in this situation. What does he think happened?
Yeah.
What did he see? What did he experience? What were those events? What was the cause and effect that he experienced? What was the problem as he saw it? Or he might not have even seen a problem, but let's find out everything that Adam knows. And this is really akin to checking our students' prior knowledge before we build on it, right? You wouldn't teach them something without checking what they already know. So why not check what your teacher's or mental model of a situation is? And then it's not about imposing your mental model on it, but it's about widening Adam's lens. I really like the way he put that. It's widening his lens. What is he perhaps not seeing? What causes is he not taking into account at the moment? How can I give him that wider perspective and viewpoint through some questions? Now, bear in mind that Adam is really expert, so you can ask a lot of questions and he will take it in a particular direction. You might have to ask a question and then model your thinking to a teacher that isn't as expert as Adam. So you're not just going to ask loads of questions and never tell them anything. That's not the idea. You're going to flex depending on how expert your coachee is in that area. Luckily, Adam could kind of take it all and run with it. I didn't know what solution in that sense Adam was going to kind of come up with there. Sometimes I will have a solution in mind, which is useful because you can kind of offer it, can't you, if the teacher's struggling with coming up with it. So I think there's something about what you said there, Chris, about walking upstream together, and the coaching conversation is kind of walking along the stream, maybe back down the stream together as well. But you're trying to, yes, guide that person, but give them that greater vantage point rather than just tell them this is necessarily going to help you. However, sometimes you do have to offer your opinion and offer what you need to say as well. So yeah, I think a mental models approach where you get their mental model out there, help them to increase their vantage point, can be really helpful with those coachees like Adam.
Adam, do you have anything to add to that? Because for viewers who'll be watching us, I'm on half term, so yeah, it's very mature. Sarah's works from home, and you are in school right now, as we can see from your brilliant mainstream school wall that you've got behind you, with lots of timetables. At least you haven't got. At least we can't see the yellow bit. That's the saving grace. And we are we're a couple of minutes out from ending our first episode together to make sure it's nice and digestible and people can listen to it on the bus if that's what people want to do. So, what can you add to Sarah's suggestion there about the method of surfacing your mental model to yourself, whilst at the same time seeing if it aligns to your teacher's model and your own model and stuff you've been doing before?
I think so. Jim Knight talks about partnership principles in his writing and speaking about coaching, and I think that's really important. I think that a coaching relationship should be a partnership. I think it's important to sort of unpack what that means. So, for example, you use the word manipulation to start off with. And I think where you see teachers in conversations with coaches where the coach has clearly got a fixed idea of what that teacher should be doing in a lesson, usually because it's their preference to see lots of that kind of thing. So cold calling would be an example, right? I think that is not great practice. The reason being that what that ends up with is coach coming in to visit the teacher a week later. Teacher sees the door go, thinks, oh yeah, I'm meant to be working on cold calling. Right, guys, everybody start. I'm going to cold call you. So then you end up with wrong strategy used for the wrong reason at the wrong time. So really what the coaching conversation needs to do first before we get to any strategy is work out those two things, like what's the right reason and what's the right time. We'll certainly work out those two things around the strategy. And I think as long as you go into the conversation as the coach, like being prepared to be wrong, so it's natural you're going to have your hunch of like, I think this is where we should go here. That's no problem at all, I don't think. But you have to sort of go in with the humility of I'm prepared to be wrong. And that, I think, comes back to the culture of the organisation. Like, do you have a culture whereby the person that's one rung above you in the ladder tells you what to do and you follow that instruction? Or do you have a culture whereby it's a more sort of circular approach to accountability, I suppose? Accountability being we've got this shared goal and I'm accountable to you for doing the stuff that I can do to help us achieve this thing. You're accountable to me for doing the things that you can do to help us achieve this shared goal. If you've got that, then I think the coach goes into that conversation then being prepared to be wrong. And I've had many conversations.
Live in a school.
Right, yeah, many conversations I have. I've had many coaching conversations whereby like I've gone into it thinking, oh, it's this, and actually we've ended up like going a completely different direction, particularly when we get to like the action part of the conversation, because the teacher has brought their contextual expertise to it. Like they know the class, they know what's gone before, they know what's coming next. Yes, I've got that wider lens of awareness, but they've got that contextual expertise. And sometimes that's the thing that you lean on most. Other times it's the wider awareness of the coach that the two of you together lean on most. And I think as long as you're working on those two things together, and that's where Sarah's idea about this point about mental models is so vital. Mm-hmm. If you've kind of surfaced the teacher's mental model, and you're going, right, okay, so from this is what I saw, this is what your perception was. Let's now hold those two things together in front of us. It totally depersonalizes it. So it now ceases to be about what I did, and it becomes about like what I perceived and what I understood in combination with what you perceived and what you understood. Looking at it in that way, you're gonna have to come to an agreement at some point. It's the only way to move forward. One party cannot push the other one in a particular direction in that scenario because you have completely depersonalized the whole thing.
You've sold me. I'm sold. Sarah, as we look to wrap up our brilliant first episode, my brain is, I can't believe I'm on half term and I want to get in the classroom and do some of these things. What are the key takeaways for you from this very short unpicking of this coaching session? We really hit on cause and effect as being one of the main themes that came out of today. How do you think you would sum up some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, brilliant. I think key takeaways are Adam is a joy to coach and Chris is hilarious. And I think my main takeaways are it's powerful to think in terms of mental models. It gives me as a coach a direction for my questions. I know that I'm going to look at what did Adam see happen? What events did he see? I know I'm going to dig into cause and effect. I know I'm going to start with like, what's that goal? Does Adam have this powerful goal in mind? And I'm also going to do something which I think we should probably do an episode on, which I'm going to kind of look for mismatch. So I'm going to look for where perhaps Adam's goal doesn't quite align maybe with what he's doing, or I'm going to look for kind of how cause and effect are not kind of like aligned or something like that, because that's a really good place to like heighten my coachee's like awareness and move in a better direction. So there's something that came up for me around that I think we should explore in future episodes as well. What about you, Adam? Takeaways?
Do you know, just as you were talking, I was just making a note. I think I agree with all of your takeaways. Absolutely, like cause and effect is absolutely vital, and it's absolutely vital that we consider cause and effect in partnership. I think being cognizant of the teacher's contextual expertise in combination with the coach's wider lens of awareness is definitely another key takeaway. I suppose that what I would add as well is that if anybody listening to this is thinking, oh yeah, but what if? Because that is literally, as Chris said at the start, it's literally one tiny, very precise example of a coaching conversation. If you're sat there thinking, well, all right, but what if the teacher literally has no ideas? What if the teacher says, I don't know to question number one, then what? If you've got that kind of question, a what if question, if you ping us that on X, we'll do an episode on that, and we'll model that, and then try and unpack it. Not because we know perfectly how to deal with every single situation, but because we're just willing to give it a go and encourage the interaction around that. So I suppose that would be the last takeaway, is that there will definitely be what ifs that you'll be asking off the back of this, but let us know what those what ifs are, and we'll try and unpack it together next time.
Yeah, because for everyone out there, Coaching Unpacked, there's three of us, and we do three things. We do this podcast, which will be nice and regular. We're going to do some of these sessions live, aren't we, guys? We're going to do these live online, just like this, where we can have people calling in and having a go. And we're also doing live in-person events. We're going to do live coaching in front of people where this can happen, but we'll have a drink as well. Why not? So our first one is on December the
15th.
December the 15th. We're down in Greenwich. We're on social media, Coaching Unpack, Mr. Chris Passy, Mr. Adam Colbeck, and S. Cottingat. You can find us all on, I call it Twitter. I don't subscribe to the new name. It just doesn't work for me. And we are going to be up and around the country, talking at different events and spreading the good word of all things mental models and as Adam says, unpacking the coaching. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Adam, for a very insightful. What day is it? Well, it's a weekday lunchtime. And thank you, Adam, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I bet there's a queue of kids outside the door now waiting for Mr. Colbeck to do football duty or whatever.
Football duty. Love that.
I don't know. You like sports? I don't know. Could be. All right, guys. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks so much,
Chris.
Chris.
Bye.